filled with people who share commonality and familiarity with KLS. I don't think that's happened since perhaps the last KLS conference. So I hope everyone else appreciates that like I do and finds it helpful. So I'll quickly introduce myself again, and then I'm going to deliver an update on KLS Research. So my name is Dani Farber. I am a KLS patient. I had 17 episodes. They lasted over a decade, from when I was 15 to age 24. My episodes range from the shortest being a week and a half to the longest being 4 months. I've been well now for 11 years. And I hope everyone here who is still dealing with episodes can hold on to that and know that the majority of KLS cases do self-limit, and you can continue to live your life without interruptions and without having to deal with this ongoing nightmare. My sister Arielle is a KLS patient. My parents, Neil and Varda, sit on the KLS Foundation Board. They're all not here today, so part of me being here is also to represent my family, since this has deeply affected all of us. Professionally, my dad is in the scientific and medical community, and so his focus with the foundation has really been on the research efforts, and he helped me prepare this presentation that I'm going to deliver on KLS Research. I'm not a doctor or scientist, so I'll be able to speak in a little bit more layman's terms than Dr. Anouf here. And if there are any follow-up questions that I'm not equipped to answer, I'll make sure to note them down. Either myself or someone else can get back to you with an answer, or Dr. Anouf can perhaps take a stab at some of the questions after the presentation. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I'll first give an introductory overview of where we began over 10 years ago when there was no research program in place. I'll then discuss the goals and objectives of the KLS Research, as well as some of the challenges we face. We can then discuss some specific hypotheses and focuses of research that's currently being conducted. And then finally, who is working on those different focus areas and some recent observations and results. So where do we begin? And what are we talking about when we say KLS Research? A couple points to make. One, KLS is an orphan disease, which the government defines as affecting less than 200,000 patients in the United States. And as a result, prior to the Foundation's efforts, there was very little interest from the scientific community to undertake research. As little as 15 years ago, there was absolutely no research program in place. What did exist at the time was mainly single case reports, which mainly entailed attending a physician to look at a single individual with KLS, take some notes, and then write up a presentation for the scientific community. And while this is helpful for doctors to diagnose patients, it doesn't contribute a lot from a scientific research point of view. It provides little medical value as to what is going on in the illness. This slide here comes from a scientific conference centered around orphan diseases, and I'll just quickly highlight a few interesting statistics in general about rare diseases like KLS. One, the prevalence of rare diseases. 6 to 10% of the world's population will suffer from a rare disease at one point in their life. The fact that there are entire conferences dedicated to orphan diseases, I think, is indication in and of itself that there is the prevalence of the rare disorder. And the other interesting takeaway is that the quote shows why people do research on orphan diseases despite its rarity, and that's because it affects a lot of different stakeholders, which are listed there: patient organizations, governments, health technology organizations, insurance companies, and patients. Building a research program. So how did the KLS Foundation tackle starting to build a research organization? How do we overcome the challenge of getting researchers interested in studying KLS despite that it affects so few people? The answer consists in a number of actions undertaken by the foundation. Fundraising. It obviously costs money to see research promoted, and so the foundation made an effort to raise funds for that purpose. 2, the foundation engaged various labs and provided seed funding. It then issued RFPs, which are requests for proposals, and what an RFP is, it's a request for a lab to say what kind of study they're interested in conducting, and then the foundation evaluated the responses that we received. Next, a very key action was to build our set of resources, and specifically I'm referring to the blood samples that are currently housed at the University of Stanford. And the last thing that really helped drive this research program was steering networking amongst various KLS researchers, getting people together and talking, sharing ideas and results, and building various collaborations. And over the years, there have been 3 key opportunities that you can see up there, organized by the KLS Foundation and KLS researchers to help get people together to collaborate. The first was in 2006 at the first KLS symposium, and that got interested parties together for the first time to talk about their plans for research. The second great platform for collaboration was at the first KLS conference in 2011. In addition to it being a great opportunity for KLS patients to get together, the conference had a technical component for researchers, and out of that came a lot of collaboration, so it was very successful from the scientific point of view. And then most recently there was the KLS symposium at a sleep conference in South Korea this past March. So the previous slide outlined the initial steps taken to build a research program. But even after that core infrastructure was put in place, there still remain challenges to starting in the actual research. So I'll spend a few minutes on some of the unique characteristics of KLS that present a challenge to even knowing where to begin. The first, medical tests on individuals come back within normal ranges. Normally, when you start to look at a disease, you start looking at what is going wrong. A major challenge with KLS is that we don't necessarily know what is going wrong, and therefore it makes it hard knowing where to start. Because tests do come back normal, the next best thing is to start looking at clinical observations. KLS starts in adolescence, it's triggered by an illness or stress, cyclical in nature, the length and frequency of episodes. All of these give clues, but they still present challenges in really knowing where to dive into. And then finally, no biomarker shows up with patients that have KLS to test for it. And there is no known consistent treatment. So again, nothing very tangible to work off of. Here's some more just general challenges of conducting KLS research. The first 2 I alluded to on the previous slide. The cause of the illness is unknown. That's the first goal of any research. If you know what causes something, then you can use that to figure out treatment. And again, medical tests come back within a normal range. This makes it difficult to know where to begin. The third thing, the nature of the illness. The fact that KLS comes and goes in episodes makes it hard to monitor and study because patients are repeatedly getting sick and then better again. A small patient population. Scientific studies need to be done on large groups of people. The small number of people who have KLS makes it difficult to getting a collection of samples. We now have over 600 samples, blood samples at the University of Stanford lab, but we still, for example, don't have spinal fluid samples, which is even a more difficult thing to get. Accurate diagnosis. Since there's no medical test for KLS, it becomes a challenge to diagnose accurately. For example, questions arise on whether the same definition of diagnosis is being used at one lab versus another facility. And then there's the question of what do you do with borderline cases. Borderline cases are often rejected from research because it's more difficult to find scientific findings that aren't skewed. Ideally, you want as homogeneous a population as possible, and so accurate diagnosis is extremely important with clinical trials. And then lastly, funding. Biomedical research is simply very, very expensive to undertake. So, with all those challenges, how do we possibly proceed? How do we proceed? The nature of scientific research is to come up with hypotheses, scientific guesses, develop design with good controls, and then hopefully come up with some meaningful conclusions. And over the years, the KLS researchers have done just that. They've approached several different hypotheses or scientific guesses. And 6 are listed on this slide, and they're all marked with question marks, just to highlight that they're all really just guesses at this point. And so we can quickly go through them. Genetic. Most observations would say that no, KLS is not a genetic disorder. But there are 2 very interesting data points that would perhaps suggest yes. The first, there's an outsized prevalence of KLS in Ashkenazi Jews. And the second, there are cases where more than one patient in a single family has KLS. However, on the flip side of that, there are also cases that have been observed where more than one individual has KLS in a single family, but those 2 patients are not blood relatives. So that would perhaps suggest that no, this can't be genetic, but maybe this is environmental, and that's listed on the bottom of the slide. Viral. As many of you know or have experienced, a large number of KLS episodes are precipitated with a viral syndrome, a prodrome. And on top of that, the cyclical nature of KLS often also manifests in viruses. And so there are a couple of reasons why KLS may have a viral connection. Immune. Could KLS be caused by a problem in our immune system? Has something gone awry with the immune system? Well, there are patients that have KLS that have also been documented with having other medical conditions. And so perhaps there is immune weakness that's allowing the body to have KLS manifest. Neuroanatomical is a hypothesis that questions whether something particular is manifesting in the brain that causes or triggers KLS episodes. And Dr. Huang went over that in some detail in her last presentation. And the last 2, hormonal and environmental. A hormonal hypothesis arose from observations of blood samples of KLS patients. And once in a while, there were some suggestive sporadic findings, but again, nothing conclusive. And then lastly, environmental. An environmental cause is something that's very difficult to study because it involves looking at many different data points. And this hypothesis was developed from the observation of many KLS cases being clustered in Israel. And there was a scientist there, Dr. Yaakov Sivan, who looked at these KLS patients in Israel through an environmental lens. And unfortunately, nothing really stood out to him, and there was nothing conclusive that anything environmental is going on. So this slide highlights the main researchers who have worked on KLS research. Everyone in the room knows Dr. Isabelle Arnouf, and many probably know Dr. Emmanuel Mignot, but perhaps not some of the other names on this list. So I'll quickly give a background. In 1999-2000 period, the KLS Foundation connected with Dr. Mignot and helped sponsor some initial research in collaboration with Dr. Arnouf. And that initial research consisted of focusing on collecting and analyzing what was the then existing information on KLS. This led to additional work including collecting the blood samples that are now at Stanford University from patients and from the families. The foundation has subsequently provided seed funding for from a number of research projects, and where no research was being conducted 10 years ago, there's now a number of studies being performed globally in the US, in Europe, and in Asia. So there's three real takeaways here. One, KLS researchers are around the globe now. Two, they're looking at different areas of KLS, focused on some of the hypotheses that were on the previous slide. And three, the foundation has provided seed funding to a bunch of these research programs, and they're denoted up there with an asterisk. So this is a graph which charts the number of research publications on KLS that have been published over the years. I think the message is that through the KLS Foundation and through the internet, not only has general awareness on KLS increased, but there's also been an increase in research that's being published on KLS. And along those lines, along with an increase in KLS research publications, another positive trend is that, as I mentioned earlier, 15 years ago, most articles on KLS were on single case reports, on individuals, on single individuals with KLS. And over the years, the scientific studies have grown, and they're now being conducted on larger and larger groups of people. So more research and on larger groups. And the importance of these two trends is that the research data is becoming more and more scientifically significant, which in turn reinforces the need for people to participate and volunteer in studies. And I know Steve mentioned that earlier, but I can't underemphasize that point. If you haven't done so, please participate. So medical reviews on KLS, and I know someone over there asked about having access to this earlier. So another positive development is the availability now of several good review articles that summarize what is now medically known about KLS. And these articles are listed here. They've been written by the leading researchers in KLS, including Isabel Arnouf and her collaborators. And if people do want this info, I will link to the abstract, and also to the full citation is available by clicking on those highlighted titles. And what I think I can do, we can put this presentation on the foundation website as well, and then you can have access to those links as well as other information that's in here. So recent research. The next three slides are going to summarize ongoing KLS research that, as presented at the KLS Symposium in South Korea earlier this year. If you go to the link at the top of the slide, you can go to a summary of everything that was presented. And this slide summarizes some of Dr. Arnouf's extensive work. I'm not going to go into it since she just covered the material in her keynote. But the following slide starts to have some of the other researchers' work. So again, I won't go over Dr. Arnouf's work, but let's go over some specific research that was presented by other researchers at the symposium in South Korea. I'll start with Dr. Mignot in the Stanford University lab. Dr. Mignot's work has been focused on studying the genetic effects of KLS. As a background, genetic studies are a fairly new scientific capability. They require full DNA genome sequencing, and that was only first completed in 2000. So what is a genetic study? A genetic study looks for markers in the human genome, and the goal is to try to find something different, a different marker in patients with disease versus healthy controls. And Dr. Mignot has experience in looking at these markers in the genome, but to do this research, you typically need 1,000 samples, because it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. And because of the rarity of ALS, the sample requirement has created a challenge to undertake any sort of genetic study. As a result, for Dr. Mignot, this has been a 10-year experiment that has taken place in 3 different phases. And so let's quickly go over those 3 phases that Dr. Mignot has been involved in. First, because of the limited samples, the best thing for Dr. Mignot and the lab to do was to look at KLS in a homogeneous population. And as I mentioned, there's an outsized prevalence of KLS in Ashkenazi Jews. So Dr. Mignot took 45 Jewish KLS samples, but unfortunately he found nothing within those 45 samples. Phase 2, he next collected as many samples as he could from the United States, and he got around 300 to 350 samples, and he redid his analysis. And in that second time redoing the analysis, he saw some things that looked marginally significant, but when he followed up on those leads, it didn't lead to any true genetic marker. And more recently, Dr. Mignot got worldwide samples. He's collected 650 samples from all over the world, from Paris, China, Taiwan, Sweden, Israel, and Germany. And he's collected over 3,000 controls from the same country as those samples. And I want everyone to listen up here, because this experiment, this is finding something that has gotten Dr. Mignot very, very excited. He and his researchers think that they may have identified some sort of genetic marker. And I need to tell you that those results are not yet published, but his work is ongoing, and he is very excited. I should caveat that with, though, that it's a long experiment, looking at, he's analyzing billions of genome pairs. This sort of genetic study requires a tremendous amount of computer time and power. It's very challenging because of the rarity of KLS. And while we're thankful to have such a tremendous experimenter like Dr. Mignot, and we're thankful for everyone in the room who has already participated in the research, we now need additional blood samples to replicate and confirm his preliminary genetic analysis results. So again, I encourage anyone with KLS who is here today but hasn't yet participated in the research to please contact Stanford. Eileen Leary is the contact name to arrange to have blood samples sent. And you'll see when I get to the last slide, all the contact information is there for you to reach out to the Stanford Center to begin to participate. There's also flyers. Yeah, Dick's holding up flyers in the back there. That flyer is a copy of the last slide you'll see, so you can take it with you and you don't have to jot down the information when you see that slide. Okay, let me talk briefly about Dr. Huang. Dr. Huang is an investigator in China. He has collaborated with Dr. Mignot in narcolepsy, and he has a large cohort of patients in China, around 75 to 80 patients. And Dr. Huang has reported several separate studies. In one, he reports that he observed appetite actually decreasing, not increasing during episodes. This somewhat contradicts other findings. Yeah? You want to interrupt and say something? Yeah, please do.
About Emmanuel or
Any comments? Welcome, sir.
For Emmanuel, he needs 15 more samples, so what we achieve, we have 12 new patients that are scheduled in the next 2 months, so we will send them. So he needs only 50, so if anybody can send you DNA, that would be great. And what he found, he explained that to us in Korea, was a marker that was present 20% more in the patient than in the control. It's what we call the ratio 1.2. What he looked at was also between countries, and we had all, because you never know if the cases from China, from France, and from the US, and there always this problem of making the right diagnosis. And the good news was that the marker was equally present, 1.2 in all samples. So it means we are diagnosing the same patients. And it's the, I cannot say the name of the markers because it's to be published, but it has been implicated in bipolar disorder to a lower degree, 1.1, and also in psychosis, 1.1, so it's stronger than KLS. It does not mean that it's a form of bipolar disorder, so don't worry about that. But it's really the first time, after 10 years we started with the epidemic, in 2005 in Stanford, and we have something, so it's really exciting.
That's great, yeah, very, very exciting. And so the important thing is that the marker wasn't distinct to one demographic. It was in all countries and all regions.
In all countries the same, and that means that we have the disease is really a single unique disease. That's true. And for Anne reported well, appetite was decreased during episodes of already in Western countries, but it was nice to see it in Chinese patients. And he found a trend for decreased hypocretin during episodes. It does not mean that it has to do with narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is a disease where hypocretin is totally deficient, nothing. And narcolepsy patients have some lapse to sleep during the day. They don't have any other signs of KLS. They have no utilization, it's not cyclical. So it may be a marker of being sleepy, just being sleepy. It's because maybe we measure other transmitter implicated in arousal, they might be decreased too. It does not mean it's causal to the disease. And the second thing he showed, he monitored the blood pressure during 24 hours in something like 30 patients and found it lower during episodes than between, with the loss of the classical decrease curve when you rely on the notes. It suggested likely the tension during episodes, but again, it's not causal to the disease. I insist on that. It's something we noticed in patients when you are lying 20 hours per day. When you stand up, you might have a mild hypertension. So it's now post. But that was great to have all that. You mentioned also the work in Taiwan.
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
So look, we're so grateful to have you here. So anytime that I'm going over anything and you feel like you'd like to jump in, please do so. Yeah, so I'll just finish up with Dr. Han on top of him observing that appetite perhaps decreased versus increased, and Dr. Han just went over the other two things, so I'll just quickly run through it. In another study, he looked at cerebral spinal fluid, CSF, and he reported on hypocretin levels. Hypocretin, for those that don't know, is a hormone in the brain, and Dr. Mignot's lab discovered many years ago that hypocretin levels were much lower in patients with narcolepsy. He then went and looked at hypocretin levels with patients with KLS, and his findings were that hypocretin levels were slightly lower with patients in KLS, but he didn't think that they were related to KLS. It was probably something secondary. And so then Dr. Han went and looked at these 20 patients in China, in between, and also during episodes, and he saw a trend, i.e. slightly lower levels, like Dr. Mignot saw. So it wasn't really new news, just kind of confirmatory of what other findings have shown. And then lastly, what Dr. Anu said, Han monitored blood pressure and heart rate, and he did this not only during at one point in time, but he did this continuously during a 24-hour period, and so the study was a little bit better from a scientific point of view, and his findings were that blood and heart rate levels were slightly lower in KLS patients, but perhaps that could be because patients were lying in bed for long periods of time, and so the implications there could be many, but that is what he noted. But in general, Han's work is key because it involves a large cohort of patients, and his work has been more scientifically sound as a result of that, and it helps us to it helps us to understand some of the observations a little bit better. So, Dr. Huang. Dr. Huang is a researcher in Taiwan. She has 30 patients there. 20 of them she has followed for over a 5-year period of time, and she's found several observations. One, she found that the frequency of episodes decreased over time. I think this is something that most of us know qualitatively, but she was able to document in her research. Two, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I thought she found that there was no cognitive decline in KLS patients.
No, she had better news than I do. She had children, not teenagers, like just small numbers. She monitored, she tested the cognitive function during episode, which is extremely difficult and very bad, as you know, but formally bad. And she followed really well her cohort. She has been started, she followed around 5 years. And 5 years after, she mentioned the cognitive function remained intact. So that was better news than we had. And I hope it's because the children were younger.
Yeah. Well, I apologize, but I hope she's right.
Yeah, she's right.
The third thing, she performed imaging studies, SPECT scans, which revealed some changes in the thalamus, which correlates with some of the imaging studies done in Sweden and with Dr. Arnold in France. And lastly, she conducted multiple sleep latency tests. There's MSLT, and this is a technique developed by Stanford to distinguish between narcolepsy and other sleep disorders. And she concluded that there are indeed different pathologies between narcolepsy and KLS, and she ruled out any similarities. Dr. Mayer. Dr. Mayer is the go-to guy on KLS in Germany. He has been responsible for sending quite a few blood samples to the lab at Stanford. And his contribution is that he, like Dr. Renaud, argues that lithium is helping. My own personal experience, I'll just share with you. I was on lithium for over a year and had over 4 episodes during that time. So for me, I didn't deem it to be effective, but Mayer and other researchers believe that there's some evidence that lithium is helping. Maybe not in all cases, but in some. And so again, the work is ongoing, and there's still a lot of work to be done. But he does think that something is going on in some patients, perhaps a subset of KLS patients. So that wraps up the ongoing current research studies. So let's spend a minute just talking about next steps. So again, initially, the thinking on KLS was that it's not a genetic disease. Because KLS is found all over the world. It's in every country, every climate, in every racial group. But as I went over, one, the cluster of cases in Israel. Two, the fact that 16% of U.S. KLS patients are Jewish versus 2% of the U.S. population being Jewish, so an eightfold increase. And three, with multiple cases of KLS in a single family, there seems to be some reasoning that KLS could have a genetic component. And this, coupled with the preliminary implications of Dr. Mignot's lab's genetic study, is like Dr. Moon said, very, very exciting. And it further supports the reasoning that there may be a genetic marker associated with KLS. And Dr. Mignot isn't here today, but if he were, I think he would want to put everyone on notice that there indeed may be a genetic marker associated with KLS. But the work is ongoing. We need more samples to be analyzed, and it will take time to confirm. And so the 600 individuals of his research study is the largest study undertaken on KLS to date. But the lab needs even more samples. So sorry to belabor that point, but we really do need greater participation. So before I finish, I'd summarize the research update as follows. 15 years ago, there was very little in the way of KLS research. Now there is a collaborative, international, and multidisciplinary effort. Despite the research challenges associated with a rare cyclical disorder of unknown cause, ongoing hypotheses do exist about the nature of KLS. Over the last 10 years, we've developed a better understanding and a medical description of what KLS is. And then lastly, and potentially very exciting, emerging genetic results from Dr. Mignot's lab may provide a leap in KLS research. So the success of that, though, is dependent on further patient participation and funding. And I'll just finish by saying again, if you're considering helping out, please consider undertaking either one of those endeavors. Here is the information on how to get in touch with Stanford. It has the info names and phone numbers of who to contact there. I'll leave it up for a minute. I also, here, I can pass around these if no one grab them. Yeah.
Was there any coordination with the Emory Hospital with the project plan that's strong today here at Swampers?
Do you know the answer to that? Getting blood drawn today. Wow.
We looked. So we looked into it, and it's something that we actually were able to coordinate back in 2011 because we were 15 miles from Stanford, and just the logistics of trying to pull that off were just kind of too challenging at this point. But if you do contact Stanford, there's kits that they send around that you can take to kind of local doctor, and it has all the information to make sure that sample then gets back to Stanford.
And Eileen Leary, so she's the senior manager of clinical research at Stanford, and I was told she's the one that would be best to try to reach out to them. So that concludes the research update. I don't know how much time we have. Okay, so we'll save any questions that you have, and again, I'm happy to try to take a stab at them, but you may have better luck going to Dr. Huang. Thank you.